Join me, if you would, in the book of Proverbs. We're going to continue this morning discussing the subject of wisdom. The Proverbs were written by Solomon, most of them, who instructs us, ironically enough, as we move through the book of Proverbs in the months to come. At some point, we'll take up the life of Solomon and consider how one could be so wise and live so foolishly at different points in his life. But we see in chapter 4 this morning where we pick up, we are reminded of the familial context of passing on wisdom. And I hope that this will be encouraging to those of you who are trying to raise kids, those of you who have grandchildren, those of you who have nieces and nephews. I think all of our lives intersect with young people. And if you are a follower of Jesus, well then you have a desire to help them understand who God is and what God has done for them. So there's some lessons that we'll learn this morning from Proverbs chapter 4 that inform why and how we pass on faith within a family context. And then we also, for the first time in the book, we actually get to hear a grandfather speak. For the first time in the book, the father who's been teaching his son references specifically words that he heard from his father. So for the first time in the book of Proverbs, it's clearly multi-generational. And the way, just before we'll read this together, we're going to read a longer section this morning in chapter 4 from verses 1 through 19. I just want you to know what to listen for. The grandfather, the primary point of his message is really simple. He just says very directly, get wisdom. That's the whole point of his message. Picture someone at the end of their life and how this would resonate with your own life if you know the Lord. If you're nearing the end of your life and you desire to pass on to your grandchildren what is supremely valuable, what is of most enduring significance, at the top of the list would be passing on a right understanding of who God is and what he has done. So it's summarized like a grandfather's like, hey, the most important thing about being wise is be wise. Get wisdom. You need to know God, so know God. We'll consider that. And then the father, like the son of the grandfather, now teaching his sons, says to them, keep wisdom. The grandfather says, get wisdom. No matter what, get wisdom. And then the son says, keep it. So listen for that as we read together this morning. This is Proverbs chapter 4, the first 19 verses of the chapter. May God bless those who hear his word and believe it. Hear, O sons, a father's instruction, and be attentive that you may gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get insight. Do not forget, and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. Prize her highly, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a graceful garland. She will bestow on you a beautiful crown. Hear, my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. This is the word of the Lord. We're going to consider the father's speech first, the grandfather's speech, We'll look at it in verses 1 through verse 9. And I want to draw out 3 points of application that hopefully will be an encouragement to you. The first is that the familial love, is the most fertile soil in which wisdom grows. The family is the most fertile soil in which wisdom grows. I think this is applicable and significant because I think it can be common to be afraid that when you're raising children in a culture that doesn't value Jesus supremely, there can be a fear that your children can be exposed to things outside of your home, commonly at a public school system or different sports and activities for youth. There can be a fear that you can expose your kids to certain things that somehow is more powerful than the influence of their family. And I think the scriptures would say that's not the case. There are certainly many good things to guard young people against. There are certainly legitimate fears to be mindful of, to not be naive about. But we should never conclude that there are things that we can expose our children to, that there are powers that we can expose children and grandchildren to that is more powerful than the consistent, loving instruction of the home. So at this point in Proverbs, this is the clearest place where multiple generations are specifically referenced. Look at verse 1. Hear, O sons, a father's instruction. 4 times in the book of Proverbs is sons plural. This is the first time. So now this isn't just one son. This is picturing more sons. A son and a father is referenced. Go down to verse 3. When I was a son with my father. So now a grandfather is introduced. Tender, the only one in the sight of my mother. The mother is referenced a handful of times in Proverbs, but not most consistently. In this place, we find son, father, mother, grandfather. This is a picture and a reminder of a family. It's significant that God, who made the world by speaking, who has revealed himself in the heavens, Paul says in the book of Romans, God has revealed himself in the heavens in such a way that people are without excuse. Because God's invisible qualities, he says, God's eternal power and his divine nature are clearly seen in creation, so that no one is without excuse. And yet the way that God passes on the clearest knowledge of himself is in a family. So this should remind us, those of us who are parents, those of us who are grandparents, those of us who are uncles and aunts, that we have a responsibility to be passing on a right understanding of who God is and what he has done. Now, I think most people, certainly that are around our church, that's not news to. I think actually for many that feels like a burden that's pretty heavy. And it's easier to imagine you're not well equipped to do that. Or that it's easier for others. Like for me, I'm a pastor, for crying out loud. If I can't teach my kids the right stuff about God, well then who can? So I think it's easy for people in a church to imagine, parents in the church, grandparents to imagine, that if they were as well equipped as someone else, there's always someone else that we imagine is more equipped at raising up children in the faith. This instruction ought to be an encouragement to you that the wind of the Spirit, the power of God, is at the back of parents and grandparents in their family. As a parent, a mom, a dad, a grandparent, you have more influence over the understanding that the young ones in your family have about God than over any pastor, any Sunday school teacher, any Christian school teacher, any tutor, even the most wonderful athletic coach who loves Jesus and is teaching your kid wonderful things about baseball and Jesus does not have nearly as much power as mom and dad, grandfather and grandmother do in a family. The wind of God is at your back. The Old Testament says this and the New. In the book of Deuteronomy, instructions are given before they enter the promised land. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, Yahweh, the I am, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love him with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart first. If you want to raise up your kids, you love God first. You must love God supremely. And then teach them diligently to your children. Talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. If you follow the Lord, you must follow the Lord first. I mean, there's a great hypocrisy and like wanting your kids to get religion, or somehow hoping your kids will grow up obedient and following God when you don't value him enough to do that yourself. Like, it doesn't really make sense that you're going to try to convince your kids that they should spend time with God if you don't have a regular habit, because your behavior says God's not really worth it. I'm just telling you should do it because I'm a parent and you're a kid. You should do what I say. I know what's good for you. This will be good for you. But if it's not a value that you have, well, then it hasn't settled in your heart first. You're probably not going to pass it on to them because you don't actually have it yourself, potentially. But when you have this in your heart and you love God, well, then by teaching diligently, you can be confident that, like most things in life, what is valuable, most valuable, is more often caught than taught. You don't have to be a professor. You don't have to be an expert in the Bible to pass on a genuine love of God to young people in your own family. But you do need to be diligent. Paul picks this up in the book of Ephesians. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. Now he's quoting the 10 Commandments from Exodus. It's the first commandment with a promise that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. The family is the primary environment. I don't remind you of that only so that those of you who are parents and grandparents feel a burden, just to remind you and to encourage you, like the wind of the Spirit is at your back. And if you lack confidence that you can pass on a genuine understanding of who God is to your kids, well, you can be equipped. It doesn't have to be more difficult than taking an initial step by praying with your kids and even reading a Bible storybook to your kids. There's lots of very good ones. You don't have to imagine you need to be an expert. You just need to be diligent. And the wind of the Spirit, again, is at your back. The second thing I want to draw to your attention, notice verse 3, when I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me. I think one of the applications that we can take from this is that there is a benefit when you're passing on the ways of God to younger people, particularly to your own kids and grandkids, is to remember you too were young one time. Right? Don't you find yourselves, those of you who are parents, you find yourself saying the same thing to your kids over and over and over again, and you're like, unbelievable. Why do I have to say this again? How many times have I say to one of my kids, clean up after yourself? That's one of our new reoccurring phrases in our house, because no matter how many meals this one particular individual has, can get up from the table and not even notice the mountain of rice left on the table or has cascaded to the floor. Doesn't matter, this particular one, last one to leave the bedroom every day, what does he do with, I said, okay, if I narrowed it down, he leaves the light on every day. Every day. Clean up after. It's easy for me to lose sight of the fact that one time I was young and I was not wise and I was not well disciplined. This ought to remind us to be patient, to be understanding. All right, all of us who love teenagers and want to raise teenagers would do well to remember we also at one time struggled with those same issues, those same realities. Now, you know how parents and grandparents, sometimes we're reluctant to tell the truth about, what we did when we were teenagers. And why do we not want to tell the truth about what we did when we were teenagers? Because we're afraid our kids and grandkids will do the same thing. And then they'll say, but it worked out okay for you. Grandpa is wonderful. My boys have 2 wonderful grandpas. When Grandpa tells them a story about something that was not exactly a great choice, my boys are like, well, Grandpa is awesome, and it worked out okay for Grandpa, so I guess maybe I also will do that dumb thing. That's probably not going to happen in exactly that way. But we do well to remember, lest we become impatient, lest we have an unrealistic expectation of how gradually wisdom and character grow, we do well to remember we also at one time needed that same kind of patience and that same instruction. I think this section of Proverbs invites us to remember that. The third thing I'll put to you in a question. Notice in verse 2, in verse 4, and verse 10 that both the grandfather and the father are incredibly confident that what they're passing on is the right, like of God. I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. That's what the father is saying to the son. Verse 4, now the grandfather is saying to the father when he was young, let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments. And then look, the father to the son does the same thing again. Hear, my son, accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. How is it that they can speak so authoritatively and so confidently into the lives of their kids and grandkids? What enables them to say to a young person, this is the right. This is wrong, don't do it. This is the right. You must. And then attach a promise to it. Because they are only a resource passing on the source. It's the difference between a well and a faucet. Every house has all kinds of faucets that are only passing on water that came from a source. You ought to, as a grandparent and as a parent, speak authoritatively, not arrogantly, not self-righteously, not cruelly, not harshly, but authoritatively. This is the right. This is the way you should go. This is who God is. This is who you are. These aren't just theories competing with other theories in the world. So no wise parent ever says to your child, well, you might have been formed by a creator in the womb of your mother. That's a theory. You also may have evolved in this way and form. No, that's foolish. A wise parent can say with authority and confidence, this is who you are. And you must go this way in life and not this way. Why? Is it because that parent has always done everything right? No. It's because the parent who is wise is passing on the source, which is God and His Word. So we ought to make sure in our grandparenting and in our parenting, we put the greatest emphasis and speak most authoritatively about the things that come from the source. 3 things that we can learn from considering that the family is the most fertile ground for wisdom to grow. Now, here's the primary point that the father makes, verses 5 through 7. I love this. I could almost hear a grandfather saying this. Both of my grandfathers have died years and years ago. But I imagine someday I aspire to be a grandfather that would say something like this to my grandkids. Verse 7, the beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom. What does that mean? Verse 5 through 7, they go together. Get wisdom, get insight. Do not forget, do not turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, she will keep you. Love her, she will guard you. The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom. And whatever you get insight. Wisdom and insight, they're parallels in this context. All through Proverbs they are. I want to show you these verses on the screen because there's something, I think, poetic, powerful, and really summarizing about the grandfather's instruction here. Get wisdom, get insight. You can see in verse 5 and in verse 7, it's repeated. This is a transactional term. This is purchase, acquire, obtain. All throughout the book of Proverbs, there is warning given about wealth and the dangers of wealth, the power of wealth, the wise use of wealth, the perils that come with the unwise use of wealth, and it's personified in Proverbs as the violent man. So all over Proverbs is warning and instruction about the violent man. It's addressing wealth and the unwise use of wealth and the power of wealth. So he starts and ends with the same thing. It's a transactional term. He's saying, it's worth far more than riches. Like Jesus said in the New Testament, you cannot serve God and money. Jesus lifted that from the teaching of the wise in the book of Proverbs, because it's always been true. So where there is the violent man in Proverbs, what's the counterpart? Proverbs is full of pairs. There is a violent man all through the book of Proverbs that you need to stay away from. What's the counterpart to the violent man in the book of Proverbs? Counterpart to the violent man is the strange woman, the forbidden woman. The ESV translates it forbidden, or the adulterous woman. And what is she a personification of? Sexual immorality. So the grandfather, who has lived most of his life and is imparting to his grandkids what is most important, at the heart of his teaching, he is summarizing the book of Proverbs. Look out, watch out, avoid the violent man. Watch out, look out, avoid the forbidden woman. So he does it by saying, get wisdom, buy wisdom, acquire wisdom. If you could get wisdom with money, do it. Sell all you have to get wisdom. And then he personifies wisdom, echoing Proverbs, as a woman, a beautiful woman. Flee the evil of the violent man by getting wisdom. Flee the evil of the adulterous, strange, forbidden woman by loving Lady Wisdom. So he uses the language of like a bride and a dowry being paid. Look, this is like relational language. Don't forsake her. She'll keep you. Love her. She will guard you. Get wisdom. The beginning of wisdom. It could mean it's like step one. It could mean it's the most important step to take. It could mean it's the chief thing, or maybe all three. The grandfather is imploring his grandson, his granddaughter, anyone who would listen, to get wisdom and to value wisdom above all things, more than riches, more than sex, is to value wisdom. It is supreme. Jesus says equally direct things. Matthew chapter 16, Jesus tells his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. God is supremely valuable. He's worth everything. Jesus told his disciples, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has can't be my disciple. I think this is a blunt way of Solomon and Proverbs and Jesus saying, if you want wisdom, if you want God, go get him. Nothing stops you. Nothing keeps you. If you want wisdom, go get it. If you want to know God, follow him. You don't have to be born in a certain place. You don't have to be born in a certain time. You don't have to be raised by a certain kind of parent, right? Where the parent and the grandparent have the mandate to pass on faith. The child, the youth, the young one can't say, well, I didn't have parents that taught me. Didn't have grandparents that taught me. No, if you want to be wise, go get it. I think this is what the grandfather says. And this is how I could, that just sounds so grandfatherly. Quit making excuses. Quit feeling sorry for yourself. You want to be wise, go get it. You see what's clear in life? I'm telling you what's clear in life. I'm telling you what's valuable in life. Pursue wisdom. Pursue the Lord. Know him. And then the grandfather ends his speech with another familiar refrain in Proverbs: responsibility and reward. Prize her highly. She will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a graceful garland. She will bestow on you a beautiful crown. So if the grandfather says, get wisdom, now the father, the son of the grandfather, passing on to the grandchild, says poetically, keep wisdom. Let's look at his words. Verses 10 through 13. Hear, my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. Remember, all of the Proverbs that give a promise are ultimately pointing to life. Every promise in the Proverbs is ultimately more life, greater quality of life, more permanence to life. They're all about life. Hear, my son, accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. And now he introduces in this speech, he echoes another pair in Proverbs. Two paths, the path of wisdom and the path of folly, foolishness, evil. They're all synonyms, two paths. He says, I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. I have taught you the way. Now walk in it. One of the wonderful things about Proverbs is that when you take time with the Proverbs, imagine what it's saying. This is wonderful poetry. It's full of imagery. So let's think on this for a minute. I have taught you the way. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. Okay, by show of hands, this should be almost everybody. How many of you have ever gone for a walk in the woods? Humor me. Okay, good. Audience participation, love it. Most of us have been for a walk in the woods. Now, okay, there's the obvious paths, right? Like the one that starts in the parking lot. That's not the one we're talking about. Doesn't take a brilliant person to pull into the parking lot and find the trailhead. There's a sign there, and it's marked. It might even have asphalt that a steamroller's been over. Okay, that path is easy to see. But you have noticed, as you walk on the path in the woods, the one that is man-made, what else do you notice? Don't you see as you walk through the woods other paths? How did they get there? How does the path in the woods that you can know is a path, but it's not the marked one, how did that path get there? Because enough animals and people walked on it that it made it a path. This is a poetic way of saying wisdom is old. This is tried. This is true. This is tested. I think a great implication of this and the great encouragement is that we don't have to figure out how to live a blessed and happy and fulfilling life. Think about that. Humanity the world over desires a satisfying life. We've made it much more difficult than it needs to be. Sometimes when I get frustrated with my children for turning an easy thing into a difficult thing, I will say to them, don't make an easy job a hard job. We have turned having a satisfying life into an immensely difficult job. It's not. There are paths that are traveled by followers of Jesus for thousands of years that lead to a satisfying life. The book of Proverbs lays out the path of wisdom that generations of people have walked, and they have found it to be true. You don't have to find, okay, hear me in the right context. You don't have to find your own path. Jesus laid out very clearly, if you want to have a blessed, happy life, then cultivate within you poverty of spirit. This is the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. If you want to live a satisfying life, well then walk in the path of wisdom. Many have before you, and many will after you. You don't have to figure it out on your own. I find that incredibly encouraging. Lest I have a midlife crisis, imagining my life has not been as satisfying as it should be, or I imagine that the only way to have meaning in the next 10 years of my life is to recapture youth. No, I can't do that anyway. Why not find the paths that have already been laid out that lead to a satisfying life? Keep wisdom, walk on the path. Now, he's going to poetically try to inspire us to walk on the path of wisdom by telling us, avoid the path of folly, avoid the path of wickedness. This becomes clearer in verse 14 and 15. I'm going to put these on the screen for you and show you something else. He says, do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not walk in the way of evil. Those are synonyms. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. Again, much of the Proverbs is poetry. Verse 14 gives two explicit instructions, and they're the same. Don't walk on the path of evil. Verse 15 gives four specific instructions, and they're all the same. Don't walk on the path of evil. This is just a poetic way of saying, don't walk on the path of evil. No, seriously, people, don't walk on the path of evil. He goes from saying it twice to saying it 4 times. It's poetry. It's meant to communicate the significance of what he is saying. It's a warning. Don't walk on the path of evil. Why? The next 2 verses answer the question. Don't walk on the path of evil because it's a slippery slope. That's what verses 16 and 17 say. They cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble, for they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. If you don't understand how to read poetry or understand the book of Proverbs, then you can look at this and say, I know lots of people who don't follow God, and this is not an accurate description of them. I mean, this seems pretty extreme. Look at it. They can't sleep unless they have done wrong. Seriously? Like people who don't love Jesus can't go to bed at night until they do a messed up thing. That's not true. Right, that's not true, and that's not what this is saying. This is saying it's a slippery slope. Nobody starts out when they're young by saying, you know what I'm going to give my life to? Robbing life from other people. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make the point of my life to be a torment in the lives of others. Maybe, what's the Minion cartoon character? Gru. Apparently Gru, when he was young, okay, he's the exception. So verse 16 and 17 is literally fulfilled by Gru, the cartoon character. Otherwise, it's saying it's a slippery slope. The language is intense on purpose to demonstrate no one desires to start out this way, but this is how you end up. When you walk on the road of wickedness in darkness, you find yourself losing your way, doing things you had never imagined you would have done. Now, we're not going to do this by show of hands, but if we did, many in the room could raise their hand and say, there was a time and a season in my life where I lost my way down the road of wickedness, and raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. Raise your hand. Did you ever find yourself doing stuff that you never imagined you would ever do? This is what the proverb is saying. The road of darkness, it's a slippery slope. It sucks you in. It's like the people mover at the airport that makes you go faster in a direction. Stay away from it. He says, don't do it. Refuse evil. You must, if you are going to become wise, you must take seriously the instruction of Proverbs to refuse evil. What you watch, what you listen to, what you do with your body absolutely matters. Don't be foolish and naive and say, oh, God loves me, he'll forgive me no matter what. That does violence to a real relationship. We don't treat people that way that we love. We shouldn't treat God that way. What you think, what you listen to, what you watch, what you do with your time, what you do with your money, what you do with your body, absolutely matters. And Proverbs says, stay away from the path of wickedness. And then it ends with this image that we'll spend a couple minutes on before lunch. The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. Okay, now by show of hands, how many of you, when your bedroom is dark, have kicked your bare foot onto the bedpost? Yeah. How's that make you feel? Angry. If you're like me, it makes me angry. I get angry. When I get scared and I get hurt, I just do not respond well. I'm a coward and I'm a wimp. So if you scare me and hurt me, that's like I'm just immediately angry. You kick the bedpost, you stumble. Why? Because you really wanted to mash your pinky toe into the bedpost. No, because you couldn't see where you're going. This is what it is to stumble. Now, put yourself in these images. This is how the Proverbs go from your brain to your heart. This is one of like the powerful ways that the Word of God goes from your brain. Like when Proverbs says like fear God, this is how you cultivate it. You spend time in God's Word. Where there's images, you sit in the image. You imagine the image. Okay, so he says the path of wickedness is like deep darkness in which we stumble and we don't know where we're going. It's a picture of life lived outside of God's design and God's best. You find yourself in the dark. The dark is uncertain. The dark robs you of confidence because you don't know where you're going. The dark for most people is scary. When I was a kid, I was afraid of the dark. When I was 44 years old, 43, I was afraid of the dark. I would sing. I remember going into my parents' basement. It's my parents' basement. It was carpeted in the house I grew up in. I was afraid to go down into the basement. So I would sing. Why? Because I wanted to feel like I wasn't alone. Or I would get my younger sister to go with me. How brave am I? There might be somebody hiding in the basement who wishes us harm. Hey, little sister, want to come with me? Darkness is a picture of loneliness, a picture of fear. It's not the way God has meant us to live. You know how sometimes you like wake up during the night and you're awake but not fully awake? Raise your hand if that's ever happened to you. Like maybe you're sleepwalking. It's like you're awake, you're not really awake. One time growing up, I had the coolest, most bizarre experience. My twin brother Mike and I, we had bunk beds. I jump out of the bunk bed because I got to go to the bathroom really, really bad. Come down the ladder, I imagine. The bedroom door is here. And the bedroom's not real big. The bedroom door is here. Well, right here, like for the rest of the length of the wall, is one of those closets that's really wide but really shallow. You know, lots of people have them. You got like accordion doors on them, or some got the slider door. This really wide and shallow closet. Our clothes are hung up, as you can picture. Instead of going out the door, down the hall to the bathroom, I went into the closet. Except for I didn't know I was in the closet. What I couldn't figure out is why it is so difficult to get out of this bedroom. And I remember like trying to get my way through the clothes in the closet. It was like, what in the world is going on? This is like darkness. This is like stumbling. If you find yourself feeling like it is impossible for you to know how to make good choices, you feel like it's impossible for you to be content, to be satisfied, to enjoy your life, to have security in the center of your being, maybe it's because you're walking in darkness. Maybe you haven't availed yourself to the paths in the light that God has made clearly known. Because when we're in the dark, we feel alone. We stumble, we lose our way, we kick our feet against the bed, and this is not what God has made us for. This language of deep darkness, the exact same language is used in the story of God pronouncing judgments on Pharaoh prior to the Exodus. There's 10 plagues, many of you know that. The 10th plague is the most severe. It's the death of the firstborn sons. The 9th plague, the second to last plague, is darkness. Then the I Am said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward heaven that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt." That's an image. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven and there was pitch darkness. Exact same Hebrew words as the Proverbs pick up. In all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from place for 3 days. Why did they not see one another? It's dark. It's a picture of loneliness. Because they could have lit a candle, right? It's a picture of isolation, loneliness. Nor did they rise from their place for 3 days. Picture of fear. But all the people of Israel had light where they lived. That's what I'm talking about. To walk apart from God is to walk in darkness. To pursue the path of God and godliness and obedience, to pursue wisdom, which is the path of Christ, is this image, verse 18. The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. All right, so now picture yourself. Picture yourself seeing a sunrise. How do you feel when you see the sunrise? Hopeful? Encouraged? You're looking at light. Your attention is fixed on the light. Isn't that interesting? When you go to see the sunrise, you don't normally have a hard time focusing on the light. Like, because if you got yourself out of bed early enough to see the sunrise, you're probably not distracted by the other stuff. You're like looking at the sunrise. The sun rises in the sky. What does the sun do as it rises in the sky? When it gets bigger, you can see it more. When you first learn how to follow Jesus, sometimes it feels difficult to discern his way, to know his will, to know how to behave and conduct yourself, to know how to think, how to feel, what to do. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn. The sun gets bigger. It gets easier to understand the ways of Jesus as you follow him. The sun gets bigger. What else does it do? It gets warmer. Right? You don't really feel much on your skin when the sun is just peeking up over the horizon. Later in the morning, you can feel the sun. It warms you. What else does the sun do? It warms the air. Now you're smelling something pleasant. It wakes up life around you. Melts away the frost, burns off the dew, activates life all around you. This is how the path of the righteous is. We didn't make the sun. We didn't make the path. We choose which one to walk on. We can choose to walk in darkness, or we can choose to walk on the known paths in which there is a sunrise that shines brighter and brighter until the fullness of day. So, not surprisingly, Jesus of Nazareth says that he is the light of the world. And he says, whoever walks in him will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. God has made you for light and life. God has made you to know him, to see him clearly, on well-traveled paths. You don't have to figure it out for yourself. God has revealed it. And many, 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 untold many have walked those paths before us. And how good is God that it's like a sun that rises. Like, isn't it impossible to miss the sunrise if you're up that early? Right? Really? Whoever has gotten up to watch the sunrise and can't find it? That would actually be really comical. Just look for where the light is. Okay, good. You don't even have to teach people that. Somehow you just instinctively know to do that. How good is God that the paths that he has us walk, they're known, they're well-traveled. And it's like the light of dawn shining brighter and brighter until the fullness of day. Let me pray, and I'll give you a moment to meditate further on that image, and then we'll sing a song in celebration as we dismiss. Let's pray together.